Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Rivero, and I am the John Jay Student Government President. And I have the honor of being joined today by other amazing Bloodhounds and John Jay students. With me are Romello Ford, Brianna Schmidt, Michelle Ceballos, Benny Poi, and DeCarlos Hines. Over the last few months, many of us have talked about the importance of registering to vote and the history of voting. To support our JJC Rocks the Vote initiative, John Jay has partnered with several organizations, including RISE, a national nonprofit that educates and empowers the sports community to eliminate racial discrimination and champion social justice and improve race relations in our communities. Through their Rise to Vote program, they engage the community, athletes, coaches, and staff at all levels, educating them on how to vote and why it matters. They equip them with tools to get involved and make a difference and inspire others to be civically active. Thank you, Rise, for being here. Another partner here with us today is NALIO Education Fund, a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that encourages full Latino participation in the American political process. As a Hispanic serving institute, John Jay embraces our diversity and works to promote civic engagement. This year is like nothing any of us have ever seen or experienced before. And even though things are not the way that we would have wanted, our work continues. If we want to see real change happen, we must go out and vote. I challenge all of my peers that are eligible to vote to please utilize your vote. We have real issues to address in our communities, especially as our country continues to face the coronavirus pandemic and racial injustice is at the forefront. While change is slow, voting is real. To fix what's not working for us, we have to start at the polls. We need to talk about how important every election is. First, for an example, think about all the group chats you're in. Think about the Facebook groups that you're a part of, or any student organizations or other organizations in your community that you're affiliated with. We need to talk about how important every election is, from the president to your state legislator, and inspire others to vote through social media. The last day to vote is November 3rd, and more than 50 million people have already cast their ballots. You can join them. I now have the great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Rashad Jennings. Rashad is a former football student athlete at the University of Pittsburgh before transferring to Liberty University to be closer to his home. Following a great collegiate career, Rashad played professionally in the NFL, having spent time with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Oakland Raiders, and most recently, the New York Giants. John Jay has a very special relationship with the New York Giants, as they have established the Touchdown Fellowship for 5 students interested in criminal and social justice reform. Since Rashad's retirement from the Giants in 2017, he has become a regular TV talk and sports show personality and a best-selling author. In 2018, he published his first book, The If in Life: How to Get Off Life's Sidelines and Become Your Best Self, which reached the New York Times bestseller list. And now I pass it over to Rashad. Thank you for being here with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate that introduction. I'm humbled every time I actually hear it. And hello to everybody out there. This is kind of, we're still trying to get used to the Zoom world where there's no actually interaction, right? So I'm going to try to be as lively as I possibly can without feedback. But listen, guys, I'm humbled to be here to kind of talk on this important issue for a few moments of your time. As she said, I went to Liberty University, graduated. I studied psychology and sociology. I went back, got my honorary doctorate degree, and I'm currently getting my license in premarital and marital counseling, which I'm a lover of love. And so if anybody's thinking about getting on that knee or saying yes, holler at me. And I also could teach you to dance as well, as I somehow tricked America and won Dancing with the Stars. So I got a little twinkle toe in me. But with all that being said, it's cool. I always tell people it's really nothing special about me. It's just the position I'm in that's unique. And with that position, I always feel it's important to be a magnifying glass towards issues that I think are important. And this is definitely one. And I kind of want to, we could talk about a lot of different things, but one thing I ran across a quote that an expert had said, and it's in quote, a financial expert said this: if good people remain financially illiterate, then that leaves all the money in the hands of potential bad people. And that principle can be applied in many areas of life, including voting. I personally have come to understand how powerful a vote is, and I give a few stories about it. One is very playful, and one has some sense of philosophy behind it. If good people, like yourselves, decide not to learn on issues and vote, then that leaves the decisions to be made by other people. And we don't want to live a life where other people are making our decisions. I give an example in a world that I think we all can laugh and appreciate. One time I wanted to take this girl out. She's beautiful. Wanted to take her out on a date. And, I want to do something special for her. It's all about her. So I asked, what kind of food would you like to eat? Right? I'm thinking I'm going to find the best restaurant. She tell me what style, what kind of food. And she said, it doesn't matter. You could pick. And I was thinking, okay, cool. But, I really want to do this for you. This is what I'm thinking. So let me figure out, do you want a big meal, a small meal? And she said, no, it's fine. You could pick. I was like, well, do you want like Italian food, American food? You want some sushi? She was like, no, either way you could pick. And I said, okay. So I picked sushi, right? We get there. She can't find anything on the menu she wants. And the first thing she says is, I don't want this. And I thought to myself, I gave you the opportunity to cast in your vote on what you wanted, and you didn't do anything. And so now that you are presented with these only options, you're disappointed. And, as a joke, right? Like it's haha, it's very lighthearted, but we can understand the concept. If we don't give our vote, especially when asked upon, it's hard to be upset at the results. And, I think personally, I'm very nonpartisan. I think it's very important to get involved in the actual issues at hand, and try not to be a political identity character where you're blind to what's actually happening in the world one way or another. It's very deep. And I think as an athlete, we have a great, powerful position because people look up to us, especially our communities, and getting into our local government. I think is something that a lot of us should do. And everything from speeding limits to politician terms are affected by our voting, right? Which we all know. Everything from the cost of food and food safety and what we eat are affected by voting. Everything from what school we go to or what is actually being taught in our schools are affected by voting. Everything from discrimination, equality, inclusion, diversion, equity, are all things that are affected by voting. And, we might not always see the results immediately that we may want. For another example, I was an NFL player rep and for 8 years in the NFL, which I'm elected by my peers to take on the responsibility of being a liaison between the actual NFL and the players, right? The NFL is not us. We are the players. The NFL is owned by 32 individuals and or shareholders of those 32 companies. And so as a representative, what I do is go set in these negotiating tables. And there was one particular term I wanted to change, and that was the ceiling and the floorboard that agents are compensated the percentage from the players' contracts. I wanted to get that lower, and I fought tooth and nail. Every agent hated me. It took a while for the players to understand what I was trying to do. I ended up representing myself. My last year, I saved a lot more money, and I got more money than the agent that was representing me said I would get, and I didn't have to pay him, so I was winning. And this is something I fought tooth and nail for. And it didn't happen until 3 years after I retired that they changed it. And so I laid the groundwork for it. And I'm sure you men and women, there's so many amazing ideas that you have. I encourage you not to be intimidated by it, because of a lot of times, to see big change, it takes time, right? It takes effort. And I encourage you to put your effort in your communities, globally, nationally, locally, and you'll see the benefits over time. And also, another idea, and if you guys ever want to go to a different some websites to get some general information, it's very nonpartisan on some of the issues and concerns that we have. You can go to ontheissue.org. You can also go to vote.org just to get educated on some of the issues, because I know in college, I was more so focused on what I was trying to accomplish, and it took me a long time to get educated on some of the policies I actually cared about. And don't ever feel that, one party has it all together versus this party. And, I see people lose friends. I see people lose relationships because of voting, but you do want to be able to get to the position where you're able to explain why you believe what you believe. That is I think a standard beyond voting that we all should kind of walk with. A principle is getting to the point to understand and kind of be able to explain what you believe in and not get caught up in the pressures of our people. But listen, guys, I do want to share one more story about just the impact and how vote, because I know you guys are all registered. I know you guys will vote. And so I just want to remind you and give some encouragement to showing you the compound interest that comes with voting, the importance of it, and how if we can get everybody to do it, we will see the changes we want far as in our communities and changes. And by the way, I think there's a subconscious conversation going on with a lot of people. When I say changes, it doesn't mean that I am saying change this current president or not. When I say changes, I really mean to see the changes that we desire. And, take this story for what it's worth. One day when I was in middle school, my pops came and picked me up from middle school. He came and picked me up and we played hooky, right? He picked me up and he signed me out. He got me out of class, and I think I'm in trouble. Why was my dad taking me out of school? And we got in the car and we went to the nearest beach, and it was cold, so we didn't get in the water, but we actually had pizza on the sand, and it was a good father-son bonding moment. Later, as we're driving in the truck, we're just talking about life, and eventually we, meander our way back to the house. I get home right on time when I typically would walk in the house, so nobody knew that I skipped. And I'm in my room and I'm taking off my shoes and I'm pouring the sand out on the carpet. My mom busts in the door, right? And she sees me pouring sand out and flips. She's a big neat freak and everything. She's a mom, right? So she's like, "What are you doing? Where's all the sand coming from?" Now, she knows my school doesn't have any sand pits. She knows her son. Where the heck have you been, right? It's probably what she's thinking. I'm nervous because I don't want to tell her where I've been, right? Because I get in trouble. Maybe I get my dad in trouble. I don't know. So I'm just sitting there with the upside down shoe, sand pouring out, my mom yelling at me. And luckily, my dad comes in, saves the day, puts his hands on my mom's shoulder and says, "Honey, I got it." And she walks away and she's, still barking. "Yeah, you better make sure he clean that up." She walks away. And my dad looked at me and just smiled and said, "I'm proud of you." And I was thinking, yeah, I bet you're proud that I ain't telling you. And he said, "Son, the reason why I'm proud of you is because you changed the world." It's like, what is he talking about? So I said, "Dad, what do you mean?" He said, the way the earth rotates and the way the sun beams brought that sand to that very beach. You took a piece of that sand, therefore you simply changed the world. And I thought about it for a long time, and I was like, that's a weird way to think that I changed the world. But I did move something. So I'm taking that idea, and the older I got, I thought about how long would it take for me to go to that beach, take a shoe full of sand, take it home, pour it out. How long would that take before you can see a significant difference in the beach? It would take years. It would take decades before you just saw a smidgen. But then I started thinking, what if everybody in the world went to the same beach one day and everybody picked one scoop of sand and took it away from the beach? How much of an impact would you see? We would drastically see a difference. And it's methodical, but that's the importance of our vote. It's simply everybody doing their part, everybody getting educated. If we want to see growth, no matter who is in the leadership position, there's a great onus and ownership on the society to do their part. And, oftentimes I look to local communities, I look to local government, I look to my mayor. I have a great relationship with our chambers of commerce wherever I reside at. And I find ways to build in the community because I don't let media, which scientifically means bacteria, I don't allow the media to dictate my emotions, what I decide to get educated on, and how I decide to treat people. And these are things that I think encompass with putting a vote in is finding ways to see the outcomes that you want. You have to participate truly, and I'm going to continue to do that. I think this is an interesting election. I think for various different reasons, and I very well can see great reasons why any and everybody would vote for either party. But I hope each one of you feel the confidence to decide based upon what you've been educated on personally, rather than he say, she say. And I think that goes without being said that we should follow that notion, and no matter what avenue it is. And I hope you guys appreciate some of the tips, some of the perspectives that I've been able to give right here in the Zoom for a short period of time on the importance to vote.
Thank you, Rashad. The knowledge you provided is so helpful and empowering. I'm sure many of us can relate to the experiences you shared. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Romello Ford. I am voting because I want to see a positive change in my own community that will have a significant impact on the youth for their future. To build on Rashad's message, I would love to move on to the next portion of our program. Panel discussion with Diane Billings-Buford, CEO of RISE, Dinora Getachew, John Jay alumna with a degree in legal studies, former New York Executive Director of Generation Citizen, John Jay's very own Professor Heath Brown in the Department of Public Management, and finally Benny Poi, the Northeast Program Coordinator for NALIO Educational Fund and a current John Jay MPA student. If you want to know more about their bios, it's in the chat. I am joined by my fellow student athlete, Brianna Schmidt, who I will ask to get us started.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brianna Schmidt. I vote for the oppressed. Thank you to all the panelists for being with us today. We are excited to hear your answers based on your experience and expertise. I want to prep our audience by saying that this is a lightning panel, meaning we've got just a few but packed questions for our panelists. You will gain great information when we're through. I'd like to kick us off with a question for Professor Brown. When our nation's democracy was founded in the 1700s, only 6% of the citizens could vote, white men that owned land. Now, 71% of the nation is eligible to vote, but still many don't, or they face voter suppression techniques like disproportionate polling locations, felony disenfranchisement, and voter roll purges. Help set the scene for us about the current climate of our democracy, current turnout trends, and voter integrity. Also, could you share some resources that help ensure voter integrity and voter rights?
Brianna, thank you. And thank you, Rashad, for that keynote address. I feel a little remiss following you with a bunch of statistics, but I'll do my best to go through this quickly and, Brianna, respond to your questions, which I think are really important questions. Let's be clear. Our democracy is under a great threat. There's no minimizing that, but voters, especially young and marginalized citizens, provide many reasons to be hopeful. The statistics, the ones that I'm talking about very briefly, tell a story about a changing and enthusiastic electorate who face many barriers to voting, but who show incredible determination and grit. So let's start with who's eligible to vote, because even though every resident of this country, every single one of them, has many political rights, not everyone has voting rights. From 2000 to 2018, over the last 20 odd years, the nation's eligible voter population grew from around 193 million to 233 million, an increase of 40 million newly eligible voters. Voters who are Hispanic, Black, Asian, and other race and ethnicity categories accounted for more than 3/4, 76% of this growth. This is a reason to be very excited about our democracy. Now, in normal circumstances, and things are far from normal this year, around 70% of eligible voters register to vote. Brianna, I think that you mentioned this statistic. I think you may even said it's up about a point. I think you're right. Out of these registered voters, we get the electorate, who determine the next president of the United States, as well as the members of Congress and the Senate. Unfortunately, not everyone turns out to vote. Some because they're too busy. Many of you are simply too busy with all of our commitments, but others because they are discouraged to vote by accident or even worse, on purpose. This is what we describe as voter suppression. In 2018, the last major election, 52% of eligible voters turned out to vote, the highest midterm election turnout in my lifetime, and lifetimes I suspect of everyone on the call today. And there was even more good news for young people. Among the 18 to 29-year-old cohort in 2018, voter turnout went from 20% in 2014 to 36% in 2018, the largest percentage point increase for any age group, a 79% jump. This is also very good news. This really takes us to today. Recently, some 67% of Americans say that they are more enthusiastic about voting than normal, tying the highest rate measured in previous elections. And when the Pew organization asked registered voters how much the presidential election really matters, this year 83% said it does, a higher percentage than Pew has recorded in the last 20 years. This is also very good news. This is showing up already in early voting. We know that early voting is up. In 2018, 40% of voters used an alternative voting method. This year, at least 69 million people have voted in the 2020 general election. That's just already, and we still have in New York many days left of early voting. In some states, early voting is even higher than this. 39% in Vermont, 30% in Virginia, and 27% in Texas. Now, our democracy is not there yet, and early voting alone will not make this election happen. There are many reasons to worry about next Tuesday, including some current concerns about some of the worst forms of political violence and intimidation. In response to your last question, if you witness this, the ACLU has organized a hotline to report the voter intimidation that you may see, that you may observe for yourself or your loved ones. You can call the Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE or 888-VEY-VOTA to do so in Spanish. There are resources available. I think we're going to talk about some of those, but ACLU provides at least one. I'll end there and thank you all for having me a part of the panel.
Thank you, Professor Brown. You gave some very helpful information. The next question is for Dinora. Why does my vote matter if the Electoral College chooses the president? Can you explain how the Electoral College works? I ask this question because many of us want to better understand why Hillary Clinton did not become the 45th president when she won the popular vote. How important is it for us to learn and understand this information?
Such a great question, and hello to everyone out there. I'm so honored and proud to be here amongst the John Jay audience as a fellow John Jay alum, although I was once told that the degree that I earned from John Jay is no longer worth its salt because it's not as rigorous as the degree many of you are earning in political science and otherwise. So that legal studies degree, don't go look it up, it doesn't exist anymore. Starting off with some lighthearted humor because we're talking about a heavy topic and there's 5 days until Election Day, and I want us all to get activated, get engaged, and know what we need to do. And Romello, I thank you so much for that question because you hit me with a hard one, right? Ironically, I was just talking to my 8 and 9-year-old daughters in the car on the way to school on Tuesday about the Electoral College because my 9-year-old daughter asked me the same thing, like why didn't Hillary Clinton win if she had more votes? And the reality is the Electoral College is a very complicated system. So I'm going to try to break it down in layman's terms, and I'm going to hit you in the chat with some links just to give you more information in case I get too wonky or you want to get really wonky and go deeper. So let me break it down. So the Electoral College is really what governs how you select the president. Unlike every other office that you vote for, be it members of Congress, your local mayor, your local city council member. Professor Brown spoke a lot about voting at the federal level. My life's work is really committed to getting everybody to focus also on voting at the local level. And so I mentioned those other offices because 2021 is a big election year in New York City. And I want you all to be thinking about all of this energy you have right now and how do you fuel it for the next election cycle. So the Electoral College was created in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia when the Constitution was being drafted. And it really was designed with the goal of making sure that there weren't going to be political factions, powerful factions or political parties, and really just creating a mechanism that would allow a more formal way of electing the president than really just having it, feel like a popularity contest, if you will. You may know the math, but I'll just say it to you for your purposes as we think about the final days of voting coming up, and then what's at stake from then until the confirmation of the next president. So in order to win the presidency of the United States, you have to collect 270 of the total 538 electoral votes ascribed to the states and territories. Most states, except for Maine and Nebraska, have winner-take-all systems, meaning if your state has a set number of votes, then all of the votes should be cast to whoever wins the majority of the popular vote in that state. And then the electors are these groups of people who have been designated by political parties in their state to be able to vote for the person who wins the popular vote in their state. And that vote takes place much after Election Day on Wednesday, December 14th. So just keep that in mind as something in the back of your mind. To answer your question head on, Romello, you can be the president of the United States even if you lose the popular vote, because the goal is just getting to that numerical math on the map of getting to 270 votes. And this is what happened to Secretary Hillary Clinton, who won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, right? But Donald Trump, the president, garnered 57% of the Electoral College votes, so he won the popular vote. You might be wondering, what's the deal with this Electoral College? Have we had issues with it in the past? Fun fact, yes, we have. I'm not going to get all the way in the weeds, but there was a really great podcast on The Daily from the New York Times earlier this week. I've been podcasting and getting all up in my democracy facts that really explained and broke down the 2000 election. Many of you may not have voted for the first time then or been old enough to participate in that way, but it does give us a glimmer of what to expect because there was a difference between the popular vote and the Electoral College that made it all the way to the Supreme Court and really had to figure out how best to break up the votes. Other fun facts, because you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, what if there are these electors and they are supposed to vote one way, but they don't actually vote that way? What happens then, Dinora? That's the problem. We call those people faithless electors. And in many states, and in the 2016 election, some Democrats and Republican electors actually went against the vote and voted for third-party candidates. And so again, that has been an issue that has been litigated in the courts to make sure that States can hold their electors, if you will, accountable to vote in accordance with the popular vote in their state. And so that is something that also might come up again this election cycle. And so that's kind of an overview of what the Electoral College is, how it intersects with the national popular vote. And I'm going to put in the chat a couple of links just to go deeper on that or answer any questions that I didn't address. And I look forward to participating in the conversation.
Thank you, Dinora, for giving us a broader understanding of the Electoral College. The next question goes to Diane. Sports are a part of America's greatest traditions. We want to ensure voting is a can't-miss American tradition. What role can athletes play in creating more awareness around voter education and motivating our communities to realize the importance of it and that their vote does matter?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you all for having me. And thank you guys for, RISE is excited to partner more. Listen, this is a part of what RISE does year in and year out. Rashad that came on earlier to give you guys a clear answer to that question. Before this year came and before people were excited and kind of engaged over this federal election, Rashad led a voting education tour for us in the state of Virginia, where we were really seeing a low number of voter turnout across certain groups, and he really impacted the number of those demographics that voted in that state. And so I think the role is, if we have athletes in various communities who this is the topic that they're passionate about and they can speak authentically and they're willing to put in the time, they can and they have had great impact. That's not new in the United States of America. I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, Charles Barkley, who has openly talked about being a Republican, and he went to school at Auburn in Alabama. He went down and came out publicly and said, I'm for Doug Jones, the Democratic candidate in Alabama. Alabama has a Democratic senator because an athlete went to the state and campaigned with him publicly. So it is very clear what athletes can do. And then I would end my answer by saying, I don't want to limit this to people like Rashad and Charles, who are professional athletes. Much like CUNY, I'm a Brooklyn girl. The University of Texas is another big public school system, public college system. At the University of Texas, Austin, it was 40 athletes, and nobody stood on their own. They all worked together. They didn't put their names on it. They started a petition. They have impacted voting. They have another polling site on their campus because of things they've done. They are addressing a school song rooted in racism. They are getting Confederate statues taken down. So what athletes can do and what they actually are doing at every level is great. So I hope that we'll be doing more with students at John Jay, and I'll be telling stories like this about you guys across the CUNY system.
Thank you, that was very powerful. I have a follow-up question for you. Why do you think that there is a lack of understanding when it comes to voter education and voter rights? How do we make sure everyone is aware of how they can vote?
Yep. I think the lack of education is for 2 reasons. One, we can never forget that voter suppression is intentional and it is real. There have always been in our country forces that would seek to disenfranchise or stop certain groups from voting. When the nation started, 6% of our nation could vote. 6% were eligible to vote. White men that own land, that's it. This year, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. That was in 1920. It took us 75 years for women to get the right to vote. Then we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that really opened the doors for people of color. Then we had another, I'm forgetting the law now, that really addressed poll taxes that really kept poor people from voting. So it is somewhat intentional that folks are left out of this process, and we must continue to fight so that more and more people are enfranchised. And the way to do that is through educating. When people know they can take part, they do. I think 2 great examples, Snoop Dogg and Mike Tyson. Again, I'm a Brooklyn girl, so Mike's from Brooklyn. But both of them this year, through voter education, they learned. They thought they couldn't vote because they had gone to jail. and they have been felons, but they were eligible to register, and both of them have voted in this election. And so I think the one thing that stops is the intentional oppression and kind of not sharing of information. And then the other thing is apathy. You know, as a woman, as a person of color, as a person who didn't grow up wealthy, I say some of it is also, it's on us to not be apathetic. And because someone is not handing you something doesn't mean you don't go take it. And so sometimes we don't have education because folks don't want us to have it. And sometimes we don't have education because we don't make it happen. So I think I would put, my answers in those two categories.
Thanks, Diane. The next set of questions goes to Benny. The Nalio Education Fund estimates that more than 14 million Latino voters will cast their ballots in this election. How does this compare to the previous presidential election? Why is it important for the Latinx community to vote? What does your organization do to engage the Latinx community? And as an HSI educational institution, how can students help ensure the Latino vote is safeguarded and not at risk?
Romello, first, thank you so much for those really great questions. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, say thank you so much to everyone who helped organize this forum. Thank you so much to Mr. Jennings. And I also want to recognize an old professor of mine, Professor Henry Smart, because I am also a John Jay student, an MPA John Jay student. So it's just really great to be in great company. And thank you so much to my fellow panelists for such great answers to really great questions. So thank you again for that great question. And just a small correction, because every single vote counts. We have actually calculated that there are 14.6 million Latino voters who are expected to cast a ballot for the upcoming election. And that's a nationwide number. And this is, as compared to 2016, this is a 15% increase, which is very significant as compared to the general election in 2016. As another example of the growth of the Latino electorate, if we look at the growth of the Latino electorate from 2000 to 2016, the Latino vote grew nationwide from 5.9 million, almost 6 million, to 12.6 million. That is an increase of 114%. So that is very significant. And this just goes to show how large the Latino vote is. And this should signal deeper investment by political campaigns into our communities. So this goes into your second question, and it's, why is it important for the Latino community to vote? As you can see, we are a very large voting bloc, and the participation of our communities, the Latino community, being also the second largest racial and ethnic group in the nation, will directly mean that political campaigns would need to alter their political platforms to meet the needs of the Latino community. And to be frank and honest, right, it's very important that the Latino community be as involved as possible. And I work for a Latino serving organization. But to be very frank and honest, when we vote, our elected officials keep our interests in mind and when making important policy decisions. Because if they don't, right, we'll vote someone else in and they'll reflect our needs and our interest, right? So this isn't only for the Latino community, this is for everybody. You vote, they pay attention, right? Before a campaign starts, they look at voting data, they look at voting trends, they look at census data, and they look at who it is that they're representing and how often those communities vote, right? So the more often we vote, the more these political campaigns will invest in our communities. And to get an idea of what the Latino community cares about, Naleo Educational Fund partnered with one of our great partners called Latino Decisions and has been surveying the Latino community for the past few months. And in this last survey, they've noticed that COVID-19, healthcare, racism and discrimination, and jobs remain some of the most important issues to the Latino community. And just to give you some data, and not to bore you with too much of it, they've ranked what they care about, what issues are important to them. And 49% said COVID-19, 40% said of which they know somebody who has been sick or has died of COVID-19, right? So there is a national dialogue that when you hear Latino, when you hear the term Latino, you think immigration. But we're much more diverse than just immigration. We care about the economy, we care about jobs, and we also care about racism and discrimination. So in order for those issues to count, we have to vote, right? We have to make sure that political campaigns hear us, that we're making our voice heard. And unfortunately, when political campaigns make decisions about who to reach out to and how to tailor their political platforms, they think about their return on investment, right? And it's important that we vote as often as possible so that they can take our interests very seriously. And you asked another question, which is really great. What does your organization do to engage the Latino community? So I'm going to throw in some shameless plugs of some of the resources NALEO Educational Fund offers. And NALEO Educational Fund, to summarize some of our services, engages the Latino community in mainly three ways. First, the NALEO Educational Fund assists Latinos through the naturalization and citizenship process, while at the same time advocating nationally to make this process more accessible, but also more affordable to everyone wanting to become a citizen in the United States. And secondly, the NALEO Educational Fund every 10 years kicks off its national census campaign called Hágase Contar, that works to ensure that Latinos are counted in the 2020 census. So this year was a census year. It has passed, but there are still very important conversations being had about the census, right? For those that don't know what the census is and how important it is to our communities, to put it in very short terms, it is the second largest national mobilization aside from a military mobilization that the United States takes part in. So this is a very large operation within the United States to count every person within the borders of the United States. And I want to re-emphasize that point. They count every person within the borders of the United States. So it doesn't matter if you're documented, undocumented, it doesn't matter what your identity is, they count every single person within the United States. And we do this because the way the federal government decides how much funding is coming into our communities is through the census data, right? And unfortunately, Latino and Black communities have historically been undercounted, right? So what does this mean? This means that if we're undercounted this year, right? If instead of counting the 10 people that live in a community, you only count 5, that means that that community is going to go with half of the funding needed to develop their schools, the public transportation, the hospitals. So being counted in the census is super important. And also remember that it's every person, no matter their documentation status. And lastly, and what we're actually talking about here today, NALEO Educational Fund works to educate and make voting easier and more accessible for Latinos through organizing, policy efforts, and we cannot stress this enough. NALEO Educational Fund does this in a strictly nonpartisan way, right? Because we understand that it's important for you to be civically engaged. It's important for you to be a part of the electoral process, and who you choose to vote for. While I personally might be invested in it, it's important that you just be a civic participant in your communities. And to help us in this work, NALEO Educational Fund created a free, nonpartisan, bilingual voter information hotline called 1-888-VE-VOTA or 1-888-839-8682. And that's available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And as we get closer to the election, it's actually going to be available from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. So that those there that need linguistic accessibility, those that feel as if they're being disenfranchised at the polls, can actually call our bilingual hotline, and it'll connect you to a team of lawyers dedicated to making sure that folks know their rights and that their rights could be defended. It's actually connected to the 866 Our Vote hotline that Professor Brown had mentioned earlier. So the Spanish calls that come to 866 that go to 866 Our Vote is actually connected to our VE-VOTA hotline. And you asked one last question, and it's how can students ensure that that the Latino vote is safeguarded? and not at risk. So first and foremost, I do want to say that the first thing you should do is make sure that you are registered to vote, right? And that you have a clear plan on how to vote, either by mail, through early voting, which is going on right now. You can early vote today, you can early vote tomorrow, all the way up until Sunday, and voting on election day. So first things first, just like if you're in an airplane, take care of yourself, create a plan, and then do that same thing with 5 or 10 people in your space, right? So the people that you know, right? I can go out into the streets and shout about how important voting is and how they should go vote and civic engagement this and civic engagement that. But you are the messenger that they're going to listen to. You are the perfect messenger for your mother. You're the perfect messenger for your friends. So that's one thing that you could do right now, is make a plan and help your community make a plan. And lastly, like I mentioned before, you can share our 1-888-VABLE at the hotline. I'll put it in the chat. And you can share this with your friends. You can share this with your family. If you know someone who needs help through the process, we'll walk you through the entire process. So thank you so much, Romello. Those were really great questions, and I'm excited to continue participating in the panel.
Thank you, Benny. Each panelist has been so enlightening in their expertise and experience. As a final question, can I ask, from your own perspective, in just 1 minute, what is the one takeaway you think our audience needs before Election Day? Can we start with Benny, then Professor Brown, then Dinora, and end with Diane?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brianna. So on top of what I just said, I think I want to echo something that Dinora had mentioned earlier, and the federal election is very important. Voting for president is very important. Being engaged in the electoral process, it's very important, but that is not the only way you can be involved, right? There's this idea that millennials and Generation Z are not participants. They're not a part of the process, or they're not politically engaged, but that's just not true, right? We know this. We know that we're on Twitter having political discourse in very short tweets, very passionately. We are going to protests. We're going to rallies. These are all part of the political process. This means that you are civically engaged. It's just about grabbing that energy, right? Grabbing the energy of your friends and of your peers and moving that energy to the poll. But understand that just because we're not seeing a certain generation voting, and we're not seeing that result at the end of the day at an election, it doesn't mean that you aren't a civic participant. But voting is that change that you make into the future. It is an intention that you are setting for the future. So that's one thing that I will say. And while the federal election is very important, it's also really important to get engaged in local elections. These are the things that change your community. These are the elections for the judges, right, that hear cases. These are that by adjudicating actually make policy, right, that lead to the further disenfranchisement or underrepresentation of Black and Latino communities, right? So it's super important to be involved at the local level. Even though the media is always covering the federal election, it's very important to be involved locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we hear from Professor Brown?
Give me a second. I'm going to pass off to whoever's next, because I've got noise coming in the background. So maybe I can go last.
Okay, thank you. Can we hear from Dinora then?
Happy to jump in, and I might have noise in my background too. My daughter's doing her choir class, so there we are, living in a pandemic. So what can we all do in this moment, right? I want everybody, like Benny said, to make your plan to vote, right? And then make sure you're bringing your family, your friends, and everyone else with you, right? And be intentional about that. You've got few more days of early voting, and then 5 days until Election Day. I like to say that I'm a democracy ninja, because I want to use all of the tools in my toolbox to advocate for a democracy that's more accessible, inclusive, and representative. And what that means is that we also can't give up on Election Day. So the same conversations that are happening on Twitter today, I'm going to write to you all, and I want to hear what you're talking about on November 4th. Right? People are going to stand in line for hours, and they're going to roll their eyes, and they're going to tweet about it. Maybe you're going to tweet at the Board of Elections, but I'm going to ask you, did you actually write the letter to the city council and to the state government to change the way elections are conducted in New York, right? It isn't just about the day of voting. It is about all of the activities that work towards this more inclusive and accessible democracy. And so what I would say to you as a Ninja for Democracy is that democracy is a full contact sport. I want to see all of you playing in it every day between this election, the 2021 election next year, the midterms in 2022 and beyond. And then for those of us who are not citizens, right, in the strict legal sense, there are other ways that we can be civically engaged and make our voices heard too, because these communities are our communities and these elected officials represent us. And so you need to stand up at those political hearings and make your voices heard. You need to write the op-eds, you need to contact the elected officials. And because I love putting things in the chat, I'm gonna share a resource from Generation Citizen that talks about ways that you all can go beyond the ballot. Because if we wanted to live in a monarchy, we would still be in that, but we don't have a monarchy. So I don't want us coordinating our leaders and not holding them accountable between elections. So thank you so much for the chance to be here today and to share a few words of advice in the lead up to the election.
Thank you. Can we hear from Diane?
Sure. I mean, mine is pretty clear. Here's the thing. I would just say, get at it, guys. Control what you control. There's a lot we don't control. People spend a lot of time telling us what we don't control. Control what we control. If you can register, register. If you can vote, vote. If you can get people out to vote, vote. Can you drive somebody to vote? Drop them off. Get them there. Control what you control, and let's get at it.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. And finally, can we hear from Professor Brown?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I understand that there's some high school students possibly in the audience here. You may not be eligible yet to vote, but you will soon. Voting, like everything, is a habit. So get in that habit now. Participate now. So when you are eligible to vote, you will be able to vote. There's so many things that we can do to participate in the democracy. Voting is just one. It's an incredibly important one, but it's not the only one. And it's not the only one available to all residents of New York, all CUNY citizens, all CUNY students. So do everything that you can do, including voting next week.
This has been an empowering experience. Again, thank you, Diane, Denora, Professor Brown, and Benny for the information you shared today. We now know more about civic engagement and in particular voting and its power. On behalf of everyone participating today, we really appreciate your time. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle Ceballos to introduce our closing speaker for today's program.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction and to all the panelists for sharing such valuable information with us. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Ceballos. As a proud Latina, Adelante student, and a criminal justice major at John Jay College, I know the importance of voting this election day. This is my first time voting, so I'm really excited to go out to the polling site and to vote. I'm going to wear a mask, remain socially distanced, and take my hand sanitizer and take all other safety precautions to make sure that I cast my ballot safely. Voting is a way to make my voice and the voice of the Latinx community heard. It's important for us to understand that we have the power to come together and vote for elected officials who truly understand the struggles that our communities go through. This is our right, and I fully intend to play a part in that, and I hope that everyone does, whether you vote by mail, early voting, or on November 3rd. So with that being said, I have the pleasure of passing the torch to a student leader, DeCarlos Hines, president of the Black Student Union and a fierce advocate for justice. DeCarlos is a junior earning a dual bachelor's and master's degree in forensic psychology. His academic excellence has allowed him to be a part of the honors program, as well as be awarded as the New York Giants Touchdown Fellowship. He is a member of the National Honor Society of Leadership and Success. As an academic, DeCarlos co-authored and presented research on developing a pipeline for minority psychologists at the American Psychological Association conference, and has also co-authored his first peer-reviewed journal article, currently under review, on systemic oppression and experiences of microaggressions. Please welcome DeCarlos Hines for our closing call to action.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Michelle. I really appreciate it. I hope that you all have been energized and empowered to vote and stay engaged in our democracy. Our ancestors fought hard for the right to vote. Many gave their lives for this expression of inclusion and this sacred right. Remember, under the Constitution, only white male citizens over the age of 21 could cast a ballot at that time. It took centuries of tireless advocacy, protests, policymaking, and court challenges for people like me, as well as Native Americans, women, and others to get the right to vote. Also, only in recent years have we seen positive changes for voting accessibility, but we still have a long way to go. Years ago, and even today in some parts of this country, voters are required to show ID as a barrier to voting. Not too long ago, literacy tests and poll tax were applied to suppress the vote. Even today, we see the same suppression in several states: long lines, goons with guns manning polling sites, throwing out of valid ballots, and the unmitigated gall to have polling sites in locations where Black and brown citizens cannot access due to lack of transportation. My friends, we have the power and can have the say in issues of such importance: criminal justice reform, social inequalities, and civil rights, immigration, education, healthcare, gender justice, climate change, food insecurities, which are all concerns for many students, by simply voting. Why do you think voting suppression exists? Why do you think politicians are begging for the vote of Black and brown people? It's because there is power in our vote. We are the ones who carry the power to tip the scale of elections. And don't you dare give your power up to anyone. I challenge each and every one here to vote and encourage others to vote, as you have heard today. Make a voting plan. What time will you go vote? What snacks will you bring in case the lines are long? Who will you take with you to vote? And research the local candidates, because they matter, so you know who you're voting for. And finally, post your voting selfie on social media, tagging John Jay College. Whether you are voting for the first time or the 20th time, celebrate your power to vote. With that call to action, I'd like to say thank you to all the speakers today and the supporters of this program. Thank you for the theater and support services for their technical involvement. On behalf of the participants, we are thrilled that John Jay and CUNY students, high school students, faculty, staff, and alumni tuned in and participated. Stick around and take photos of the resource slides that are coming up. There are volunteer opportunities posted to help protect the vote. And check out our own JJC Rocks the Vote website for information and tips. Finally, have a great evening. Please wear a mask, and remember, your vote cannot be counted unless you go and cast it.
I got this feeling inside my bones. It goes electric wavy when I turn it on. Off from my city, off from my home. We're flying up, no ceiling when we in our zone. I got that sunshine in my pocket, got that good soul in my feet. I feel that hot blood in my body when it drops. Ooh, I can't take my eyes off it, moving so phenomenally. You're more like the way we rock it, so don't stop. And under the lights, when everything goes, nowhere to hide when I'm getting you close. When we move, well, you already know. So just imagine. Nothing I can see but you when you dance, dance, dance. Feel good, good creeping up on you. So just dance, dance, dance. Come on. All those things I shouldn't do, but you dance, dance, dance. And ain't nobody leaving soon. So just dance, dance, dance. So just dance, dance, dance. Come on. Ooh, it's something magical. It's in the air, it's in my blood. is rushing on. I don't need no reason, don't need control. I fly so high, no ceiling when I'm in my zone. Cause I got that sunshine in my pocket, got that good soul in my feet. I feel that hot blood in my body when it drops. Ooh, I can't take my eyes off of it, moving so phenomenally. You're more like the way we rock it, so don't stop, stop, stop. Under the lights, nowhere to hide when I'm getting you close. When we move where you already know, so just imagine. Nothing I can see but you when you dance, dance, dance. Feel a good, good creeping up on you, so just dance, dance, dance. Come on, all those things I shouldn't do, but you dance, dance, dance. And ain't nobody leaving soon, so keep dancing. I can't stop the feeling, so just dance, dance, dance. So just dance, dance, dance. Stop the feeling, so just dance, dance, dance. Stop the feeling, yeah. So keep dancing. Oh, yeah, yeah. I can't stop the. 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 Nothing I can see but you when you good creeping up on you, so just